The morning light slanted through the dusty blinds of the diner, soft and golden, catching the thin steam rising from plates of eggs and bacon. It was barely 7, and the air already hummed with the low murmur of tired voices and the clink of silverware. Outside, the hum of engines from the nearby base rolled like distant thunder. Inside, the world was smaller, warm, ordinary, and for a few moments, peaceful. Then the door swung open with a sharp jingle of the bell. 3 soldiers stepped in, uniforms rumpled, eyes red from a long night. Their laughter was loud, the kind that filled space and demanded attention. They carried themselves like men who thought the world should make room for them. Boots thudding across the tiled floor, they slid into a booth near the window, elbows sprawling, voices carrying above the quiet conversations of the regulars. Behind the counter, Clara noticed them right away. She always did. Soldiers were common here, a part of the rhythm of this little place. She didn't mind them, not usually. She was used to the noise, the jokes, even the harmless flirting that came and went with every passing unit. She smiled, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and grabbed a pot of coffee. "Good morning, boys," she said softly, her tone polite, practiced. "Morning, sweetheart," one of them replied, smirking. "3 specials, heavy on the bacon, and keep that coffee coming." She nodded, her smile faint but steady, and moved to pour their first cups. But as she leaned over, one of them shifted his leg, and her hand jolted. A small splash of coffee spilled onto the table, droplets landing on a soldier's sleeve. It wasn't much, barely a stain, but the table went silent for half a second before laughter burst out. "Watch it, lady," the one with the coffee on his arm barked. "You burn me, I'll send you the dry cleaning bill." "I'm so sorry," Clara murmured, reaching for a napkin. But before she could wipe it up, the soldier pushed the cup toward her with a shove that sent it toppling to the floor. Hot liquid splattered across her shoes, and she stumbled back, startled. The laughter grew louder. One of them grabbed a strip of bacon from another's plate and held it up like a toast. "To service," he said mockingly. "The kind we don't want." The other 2 chuckled. Clara bent down, cleaning the spill quietly. Her hands trembled, but she didn't look up. She'd learned long ago that sometimes silence was safer. The diner had gone still except for the low hum of the fridge. A man at the counter shifted uncomfortably, but when one of the soldiers glanced his way, he dropped his gaze back to his plate. The old man in the corner booth near the window folded his newspaper a little higher, watching over the top of it. Then, one of the soldiers leaned back and spat a wet, sharp sound that broke the silence. The spit hit the counter, sliding down the edge into her tip jar. A single coin inside clinked against the glass. "Guess that's your tip," he said, grinning. Clara froze. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of the coffee dripping from the counter. Her throat tightened, but she forced a small nod, swallowing hard. "I'll bring your food right out," she said softly. The men laughed again, louder now, drunk on their own arrogance. No one moved. No one said a word. The smell of burnt toast and grease seemed to thicken in the air. At the far corner of the room, the man behind the newspaper slowly set it down. He was older, hair silvered at the temples, his frame still straight with the quiet authority of someone used to command. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, lingered on the soldiers. They didn't notice him, not yet. To them, he was just another customer in an off-duty jacket, unremarkable. But Clara noticed when he stood. There was something in the way he moved, precise, deliberate. He walked to the counter, laid a few bills down for his untouched coffee, and turned slightly toward the booth. His gaze lingered on the soldiers for just a second longer than courtesy allowed. The loudest of them caught it and sneered. "What are you looking at, old man?" The man didn't answer. He simply adjusted his coat, eyes cold and unwavering, then left without a word. The bell above the door chimed softly as it closed behind him. The soldiers went back to laughing, but Clara's hands shook as she cleared the counter. She didn't know who he was. Not yet. But something in his look, steady, sharp, commanding, stayed with her long after he'd gone. Outside, the morning sun flared against a row of parked military vehicles. The old man slipped on his cap, its insignia catching the light. Asterisk, asterisk, Major General Robert Kane. Asterisk, asterisk. And though no one in that diner knew it yet, the laughter that morning had just become a reportable offense. The diner was quiet again after the soldiers left, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, thick, heavy, filled with the weight of things left unsaid. The faint hum of the ceiling fan circled above, doing little to move the stale air. The smell of burnt coffee lingered, sharp and bitter. Clara stood behind the counter, her hands still trembling as she wiped down the same spot over and over. Her smile had faded, replaced by the hollow focus of someone trying not to cry in public. At the corner booth, General Robert Kane hadn't moved. His coffee sat untouched, the steam long gone. His uniform jacket, folded neatly beside him, bore the insignia of years' stars that carried stories, sacrifices, commands. Yet he wore none of that now. Just a plain white shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearm, the faint outline of old scars beneath the fabric. He had spent a lifetime commanding respect, but what he had just seen had nothing to do with rank or medals. It had to do with decency, the simplest rule of all, and the one most often broken. He watched as Clara forced herself to keep working. The other customers avoided her eyes, ashamed in their own silence. Not one of them had spoken up, and that, to him, was almost worse than what those boys had done. The general's jaw tightened as he reached for his cup, took a sip, and set it back down. Cold. Tasteless. Like the air in the room. He waited until the last plate had been cleared, until the chatter picked up again in awkward little bursts, nervous laughter, the rustle of napkins, anything to fill the void. Then, quietly, he stood. His movements were unhurried, deliberate, years of discipline in every small gesture. He slipped into his jacket, buttoning it halfway, not for vanity, but for clarity, to remind himself who he was and what his responsibility demanded. Clara looked up as he approached the counter. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" Her voice cracked slightly at the end. He shook his head. "No. But I need to speak with your manager." Her brow furrowed, uncertain. "Is something wrong?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes softened, just slightly, when they met hers. "No," he said finally. "Something already was." The manager appeared, a balding man with a nervous smile and the uneasy shuffle of someone who'd seen too much and preferred not to get involved. "Morning, sir. Was there a problem?" "There was," Kane said evenly. "3 soldiers. They came in here about 20 minutes ago. You saw what they did?" The man hesitated, glancing toward the door as if the soldiers might return. "Look, General." Kane cut him off. "So you do know who I am." His voice didn't rise, but it carried weight. "Good. Then you understand what I'm asking for. I want the security footage from this morning. All of it." The manager fidgeted. "Sir, I'm not sure I can just hand that over without—" The general's stare stopped him cold. "Without what?" His tone was measured, quiet, but every syllable struck like a hammer. "Without permission? Without courage? That woman just endured more humiliation in 15 minutes than most men face in a lifetime, and you're worried about a tape?" The manager swallowed hard, words caught in his throat. Kane leaned slightly forward, voice dropping to a low, deadly calm. "That woman represents this country better than those men ever will." He let the words hang in the air, each one deliberate, heavy. "And I intend to make sure every one of them remembers her face and their own shame for the rest of their careers." No one in the diner spoke. Even the hum of conversation from the back booths had stilled again, as if the air itself was listening. Clara froze mid-motion, the cloth in her hand damp and forgotten. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time saw the faint gleam of the insignia on his collar, the quiet authority that needed no introduction. The manager nodded quickly. almost stumbling as he hurried to the back office. Kane watched him go, then turned back to Clara. "You shouldn't have to put up with that," he said quietly. She tried to smile, but it broke halfway. "I'm used to it," she whispered. He shook his head. No one should ever be used to it. His tone softened, but his eyes stayed hard. The eyes of a man who'd seen too many battles, on and off the field. When the manager returned with the footage on a small drive, Kane took it without another word. He placed a few crisp bills on the counter, far more than the cost of his meal, and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. The morning sun cut through the glass, lighting the edges of his uniform. "Clara," he said over his shoulder, his voice even but resolute, "next time they walk in here, you won't be the one cleaning up." The bell chimed as he stepped out into the sunlight, the sound sharp and final. Inside, Clara stood still, the rag clutched in her hand, the echo of his words hanging in the air like a promise. Out on the lot, General Kane slid into his vehicle, the flash drive resting beside him. His reflection in the windshield looked calm, almost detached, but behind that stillness, something had already been set in motion. The calm before the storm was ending. The morning broke cold and gray, the kind of dawn that seeped through the bones and stripped away pretense. Frost clung to the grass that lined the parade field, the air sharp with the scent of oil and canvas. Rows of soldiers stood in formation, boots aligned in perfect symmetry, breath fogging the air in tight, measured bursts. The flag above them barely stirred in the wind. Among them, 3 young soldiers shifted uneasily, trying to look alert, though exhaustion and the faint smell of stale beer betrayed them. Their laughter from the night before still echoed faintly in their heads, the arrogance of the uniform still clinging to their posture. To them, this was just another early assembly, another dull briefing. The kind where the general spoke in clipped tones about duty and discipline before dismissing them to their daily grind. They had no idea. When General Robert Kane stepped onto the field, the air changed. His presence did that it always had. He moved with the calm precision of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to be obeyed. The silver of his hair caught the dawn light, his rows of medals gleamed like cold fire. Behind him, a portable monitor had been set up, the kind used for tactical reviews. That alone was unusual enough to send a faint ripple of unease through the ranks. "Company, attention." The voice of the drill sergeant cracked through the morning haze. The general gave no opening speech, no greeting, no explanation. He simply stood before them, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze steady as steel. The silence stretched long enough to grow uncomfortable. Then, without a word, he turned slightly and nodded to the aide standing beside the monitor. The screen flickered to life. The sound of a diner bell, the clatter of cups, a waitress's soft voice, the kind that tried to sound cheerful even when it trembled. Then came laughter, ugly, careless. The image was grainy, but clear enough. 3 soldiers in uniform, coffee spilled, a smirk, a hand pushing a cup off the counter. And then, unmistakably, one of them leaning forward and spitting into the woman's tip jar. The sound seemed louder in the open air than it had any right to be. No one spoke. The soldiers watched, motionless, as the scene played out. Even those who didn't know what they were seeing felt the shame crawl under their skin. When the footage ended, the general didn't look at the screen. He looked at them. "You disgraced the uniform," he said quietly. No anger, no roar, just a low, even voice that carried farther than a shout ever could. "You wore the flag on your chest and forgot what it means. You wore these stripes," he continued, his hand brushing his own shoulder, "and used them to belittle someone who served you breakfast." The 3 soldiers stood frozen, pale, their previous bravado gone. "Step forward," Kane ordered. They obeyed. Boots crunched against the gravel. One of them opened his mouth to speak, to explain, maybe, to apologize. But the general raised a hand, and silence fell again. "Names?" he asked. "Private Lang, sir. Corporal Jensen, sir. Private First Class Dorsey, sir." Kane's gaze moved between them, slow and measured. Not anymore. He stepped closer, the air tightening around them. Remove your name tags. They hesitated. Sir? Now. Metal scraped faintly as fingers unpinned fabric. The sound echoed down the line. When they were done, Kane reached out, took one of the name strips, and held it up between his fingers. A name on this uniform means something. It represents every man and woman who's worn it with honor. You don't get to keep it until you remember that. He dropped the strip to the ground. From this moment on, you are assigned to maintenance detail. Latrines, grounds, kitchen duty. You will spend the next 4 weeks serving the people you thought were beneath you. His voice hardened just slightly. Including the woman you humiliated. A murmur rippled through the formation, not defiance, but shock. Punishment was expected. But this was different. Kane let the silence return before he continued. You will report to the diner at 0600 every morning. You will clean it, serve in it, and learn what humility feels like. You will wear plain fatigues, no insignia, no rank. You will be soldiers again when you've earned the right to be called that. He stepped back, letting his words settle like frost on their skin. Dismissed. The sergeant barked the order, and the line broke. The 3 men stood motionless for a beat longer before trudging away, eyes down, stripped not of their rank but of something deeper. Kane remained where he was, the cold wind tugging at his jacket. His aide approached quietly. Sir, do you think that's enough? The general's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. No, he said softly. But it's a start. As the soldiers filed out, the faint strains of the flag rope tapping against its pole broke the silence. The sun crept higher, washing the frost from the grass. In that pale light, the base seemed cleaner somehow, not because justice had been loud, but because it had been absolute. The diner looked almost the same as it had that morning, the same faded linoleum floors, the same hum of the ceiling fan, the same scent of coffee and grease hanging in the air. But something about it felt different now, lighter, calmer, the kind of quiet that wasn't silence, but peace. The breakfast rush had just begun, sunlight cutting across the front windows in long gold ribbons. Trucks rumbled by on the highway beyond, their noise muffled by the glass. Inside, 3 soldiers moved between the tables, carrying trays, refilling mugs, clearing plates. They wore plain fatigues, clean, unadorned, stripped of insignia. No rank, no names. Just uniforms and humility. Private Lang balanced a tray of pancakes as he stopped at a table of locals. He kept his eyes down, his tone soft, respectful. Ma'am, coffee refill? She smiled and nodded, surprised by his gentleness. Jensen was wiping down the counter, methodical, careful, no trace of the swagger that once clung to his movements. Dorsey worked silently near the window, stacking dishes, his posture straight but subdued. Behind the counter, Clara poured fresh coffee into the pot. Her hair was tied back, the same as before, but her face seemed less tired now. There was something almost serene in her expression as she watched the soldiers work. She hadn't asked for this punishment, hadn't wanted revenge. But seeing them now quiet, respectful, human, she understood that justice wasn't about humiliation. It was about change. When the door opened, the little brass bell gave its familiar chime. The soldiers looked up instinctively. General Robert Kane stepped inside. He wasn't in dress uniform this time, just a crisp olive jacket with the faint shine of his insignia visible at the collar. The diner fell into stillness, the kind that came naturally in his presence. Clara straightened slightly, a small flicker of surprise crossing her face. The soldiers froze, the memory of that parade field still sharp in their minds. The general said nothing at first. He walked to his old table, the same corner booth by the window, and sat down. When Clara approached, he looked up at her, his expression calm but unreadable. The usual, he said simply. She nodded and turned toward the kitchen. But one of the soldiers, Jensen, was already moving. He carried the tray himself, setting it carefully before the general. Eggs, bacon, toast, coffee, poured just right. "Sir," he said quietly, his voice stripped of arrogance. "Your breakfast." Kane looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you, soldier." That one word times soldier times seemed to catch Jensen off guard. His shoulders stiffened slightly, not from fear, but from something like relief. He stepped back, hands clasped behind him, and joined the others behind the counter. The general ate in silence. The clatter of plates resumed, the quiet murmur of customers returning to their meals. Clara moved from table to table, her rhythm unbroken, her tone warm. She didn't glance often toward Kane's table, but she could feel his eyes watching the room not critically, but with that same quiet awareness he always carried. When he finished, he placed his utensils neatly across the plate and folded a few bills beside the check. Then, he reached into his breast pocket, took out a small folded note, and slid it beneath the coffee cup. As he stood, the three soldiers approached, forming a loose line a few feet away. There was no order to do it, just instinct. They straightened their backs, raised their hands, and saluted. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The general returned the salute with the faintest nod, the kind that spoke of acknowledgement, not absolution. Then he turned and walked toward the door. The bell chimed softly as he stepped out into the sunlight. Clara came by a moment later, collecting his check. She noticed the note beneath the cup, its neat handwriting sharp and deliberate. Asterisk. Respect is the first mark of a soldier. Asterisk. She stood there for a moment, the words sinking in, the morning light spilling across the counter. Outside, the general's vehicle pulled away, the sound fading into the hum of the road. Lang came over quietly, setting down a tray of clean mugs. "He didn't have to come back," he murmured. Clara smiled faintly. "No," she said, folding the note carefully and slipping it into her apron pocket. "But he wanted them to see that he did." The soldiers went back to work pouring coffee, serving breakfast, saying "thank you" and "yes, ma'am," with voices that carried no trace of mockery. Their movements had changed, slower now, more deliberate. Each small act of service felt like a step toward something they were trying to reclaim. As the morning wore on, Clara stood by the window, watching sunlight stretch across the tables. The world outside looked ordinary, cars passing, the flag at the base in the distance rippling in the wind, but something about it felt truer now. Justice hadn't roared. It hadn't shouted or demanded. It had simply watched, waited, and remembered. And in that quiet diner, surrounded by the smell of coffee and the sound of honest work, Clara finally exhaled, knowing that respect, once lost, could still be earned again.